Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. The apartment. My older sister Sam rented a 2-bedroom apartment on South Park Street in Wisconsin during her junior year at UW-Madison. There was a beautiful corner window in the living room, but a huge pine tree blocked the window from the busy street. Whenever Sam called me, she would be in tears and telling me about the latest ghostly figure she'd seen. I would brush it off my shoulders and roll my eyes at this. After months of Sam begging me to visit her, I finally did. When she opened the front door, my eyes were automatically glued to the hallway, and all the little hairs on my back neck stood up. Sam gave me a tour of her place, opening closets to show me how much space she had, and trying to convince me to move in with her. When she opened her bedroom walk-in closet, I felt goosebumps on my arm. I told her to close it right away because I had a feeling that someone hung themselves in there. That summer, my parents dropped off my 2 little sisters to stay with Sam. Sam's the irresponsible one in our family. That weekend, she felt so stressed out that she decided to leave the 2 little sisters at the apartment in a new big city while she went to the clubs with some friends. My little sisters, Pom and Him, were excited to be left alone without any adult supervision. At around midnight, Him fell asleep on the futon while Pom watched TV until her eyes couldn't open anymore, and she laid next to him. A few minutes later, Pom was woken by the sound of clunking of high heels on concrete coming towards the front door. She also heard voices of women talking and laughing, then the sound of keys sliding through the keyhole. Pom was happy that Sam was back. She waited there in the dark. The front door never opened. Pom dashed to the corner window to look and see if Sam's car was back. It wasn't. She saw something else. A dark figure was sitting next to the huge pine tree. Pom noticed the outline of the figure to be a little girl who had curly hair and a puffy dress. Pom screamed, waking up Him, and the both of them held each other and cried. Not more than 5 minutes later, they heard voices and high heels on concrete. Then the front door opened, with Sam and her friends walking through the door. The girls never went back to stay with Sam. When I moved in with Sam, we both shared her room. I slept on the top bunk. Sam situated her computer in the corner desk so that when you sat down to use a computer, your back would be facing the walk-in closet door and the bedroom door. Every time I'm on that computer, I have the tendency of turning around because I would feel someone was looking at me from the doorway. All my friends thought I was going crazy because I was cooped in there with Sam, who they thought was a little lunatic. They came over once to cheer me up. We were all sitting on Sam's bottom bunk, talking and laughing. We even put on a little music. One of my friends cranked up the music and started dancing. The rest of the girls joined in. The music faded shortly. It's as though someone turned down the volume. This happened several times. We got scared and ran out to the living room. We all heard the front door slam, and my friend, who ran out last, was screaming. She said she felt something pushing her out, and the door slammed on its own. Months went by. Sam and I got used to living with the others. All our friends still came over to give support, to be with us so we wouldn't freak out. Sam saw the figures the most. Sometimes when the figures saw her, they were scared as well. Got to the point where I would hear Sam talking to herself or cursing and screaming at the top of her lungs. When I ran to see what was the matter, she'd tell me that she was yelling at the figures to go back to hell. The 2 of us thought we were really losing it, until my entire family moved in temporarily for 2 weeks, until they could get into their new home. My older brother set up his computer in the living room. Each night after work, he'd stay on it until 2 or 3 in the morning. Then one night, I was watching David Letterman while he was on his computer. After about an hour, I turned off the TV and headed to my room. Several minutes later, he came in and asked if I turned off the TV. I told him I did. We walked together to the living room and the TV was turned on, but it wasn't on any channel, it was just fuzzy. He turned it off, and I headed to bed. Each night after that, the TV would turn on by itself, and it would be fuzzy. He checked the circuits and made sure nothing would trigger it to turn on, even keeping the remote next to him. Still, it turned on by itself. After that started happening, the computer in our room would turn on by itself. Nights when I completely shut down the computer and unplugged the power cord, the computer would run by itself, even if the power cord was not plugged in the outlet. There was someone or something that was messing with us for its amusement. My little niece, who was only 3 years old at the time, would run around our apartment, laughing and playing by herself. When I asked what she was doing, she'd tell me she's playing with her new friend. She was too young to be having an imaginary friend. One morning I found her in the second bedroom under the covers. I heard her saying that she's going to tell her mom something if her friend wasn't going to behave. When I uncovered the comforter, I found my little niece sitting by herself, but she had scratches on her face, as if tiny little fingernails had been dug deep into her cheeks. The last week when my family was to move into their new home, my mom slept on Sam's bed in the bottom bunk, while Sam was on her computer. My mom woke up, but just sat staring around the room, and she didn't even stir in bed. She saw a person standing by the bedroom doorway and thought it was Sam, but when she looked closer, she saw it was a little blonde-haired girl who was wearing a puffy Victorian dress with black buckled shoes and a big bow in her hair, standing there looking towards Sam. My mom said the little girl reminded her of the Alice in Wonderland, but she had curly hair. The little girl turned around and disappeared in the hallway. That alone answered many questions we had about why we always felt eerie when we were on the computer, or why the computer and TV would turn on, and who was playing with my little niece. We're still trying to find out what happened there and who the girl was. When I drive past that apartment complex, I still get goosebumps. Country horrors. I was 15 when this occurred. It was an old farm in Ontario. I went to visit my friend and his family for a week in the summer of 2001. They had recently bought a farmhouse that needed some work. The house had some disturbing history. The previous owner had hung himself in the basement of the house some 6 years before. When I say basement, it's more like a cellar. It had no entry from inside the house, only from the outside, right beside the main entry to the house. The house had also suffered a fire before this owner, which he never fixed. The house was split into 2 sections, and where you had to get to the other section, or where the burnt rooms were at, by a long hallway that was upstairs. There was 3 rooms there. One was my friend's room, the other a bathroom, and the third was the burnt room. At the end of the hallway was a door which led to the second part of the house. I only went into the second part of the house once, but it was destroyed. My friend's parents were currently trying to fix it up, but there was still a lot of fire damage. As the week went on, they told me the stories of some of the past. 2 families had shared the house, when one night, the second portion caught fire and killed a husband, his wife, and their son. Now in the burnt room in the hallway, when my friend's parents cleaned it out, they tore out a wall, and behind the wall they found a can of arsenic with a kitchen spoon in it. Well, when I stayed there, I had the pleasure of hearing what I thought to be BS stories about bangings, voices, and odd feelings. Well, one night, we were in my friend's room getting ready to go to bed, listening to music fairly loud, but we were so far away from everyone else, it didn't matter. We heard a very loud and abrupt knock on the door. We turned down the music, opened the bedroom door. No one was there. We figured it was my friend's brother messing with us. Then it happened again. We looked, no one. I decided to stand by the door, and when his brother knocked, I would open the door right away. So, sure enough, they knocked. I opened, no one there. So I looked in the hall, all the way down to where the door to the burnt section was, and it stood wide open. Me and my friend ran downstairs, and everyone was in the living room, and my friend's dad told us to stop goofing off and running around, but we weren't. We went back up to his room with his brother, played the music, and the knock started again. This time we just turned down the music, and you could hear someone running and giggling and slam the door at the end of the hallway to the burnt rooms. And not to be outdone, my friend, his brother, and I all slept in that room the next night, and heard someone in the burnt room shuffling around for about 20 minutes. That was the most terrifying experience of my life. The haunted trailer. My mother and I were talking last night, and I happened to mention something odd that had occurred in my room recently. Well, one thing led to another, and we found ourselves discussing some of the experiences the entire family had had when we lived in a decrepit trailer in Alaska. One encounter was when I was 4 years old. I remember this vividly because of how annoying it was and how much trouble it got me in. This one happened only to me. I had a bunk bed when I was little and always slept on the top because the shadows on the floor at night always scared me. Now, I was always afraid of falling off the top bunk even though there was a rail and ladder, so I slept as close to the wall as possible. One night, I heard that familiar whispering like somebody calling my name. I ignored it and tried to go back to sleep. I started to hear the voice right up against my ear, and I could feel breath against my skin. When I still didn't respond, I guess whatever it was got mad because I felt strong hands lift me up, and the next thing I knew, I was falling to the floor, and I landed on all of my toys and books. My room had been trashed. Like any child, I started to cry. My mom came into the room and simply said I'd fallen and scolded me for making such a mess. The next day, my mom said that she wouldn't take me to my grandma's until I cleaned up my room. So I put everything away, which took me over an hour, and then I thought I heard my mom call my name. I got up and went to the other end of the trailer to ask her what. She didn't call me, of course, but asked to see my room. We went to my room to find it even more trashed than it had been before. I stood there in shock after my mom left me to clean it again and thought I heard taunting laughter behind me. I remember saying, "That's not funny. Stop it right now." I cleaned again, and the room stayed clean. Fast forward a year or so. My mom was standing in the kitchen on the phone with my grandma, staring at this big yellow door that led to a storage area that we never went into. The door had a small window in it, and as my mom is staring at it, it started to open all on its own. My mom dropped the phone and ran down the street to my grandma's. She was the only one in the trailer at that time, and that took place in the middle of the afternoon. My dad had a horrible dream where he had an out-of-body experience. He was floating above his body and he could see himself and my mom sleeping. They had a closet at the foot of their bed that had mirrors on the outside, and my dad found himself being tugged towards the mirror. Ghost-like hands reached out and grabbed his legs, pulling him into the mirror and into another world away from his body. He tried to get free and back to his body. All of a sudden, he did find himself back in his own body, and the entire bed was covered with his sweat. He woke my mom up, and ever since that day until we moved, he slept out on the couch. I was about 6 years old at that time. This last one happened in front of both me and my mom. It was the month after I turned 7 and my brother was about 4 at that time. We had come back from the store and it was about 4 in the afternoon, I guess, and when we opened the door, we both saw a large goblet my mom kept on top of the TV lift itself into the air, hover for a moment, then shoot straight across the room away from us to crash into the wall. Neither me nor my mom said anything. We simply shut the door again and went to my grandma's house. About a year after that, we moved away and never looked back because we never figured out what it was that was haunting that broken down trailer. The abandoned mine. This story took place in Juneau in Alaska. The high school I attend is downtown, so it's quite a ride just to get to school and back. Sometimes my family and I go for a car trip and just drive around downtown and look at everything that's going on. On this occasion, it was my parents' anniversary, and my dad wanted to show my mom this neat trail he'd noticed while at work. We got in the car, me, my parents, and my brother, and we drove downtown. Now the trail leads up one of the mountainsides and the hike, and if you go all the way, it takes about a day. We decided to just walk up the trail to the old entrance to one of the mines that are scattered around here. All of these mines are closed down and have been for decades. Because of this, they are dusty and dark and just plain creepy. Anyway, once we got to the old mine, outside there was this little exhibit that showed some of the old tools used in the mines. My parents and brother were checking that out while I wandered around aimlessly. I started kicking this rock around and it happened to land inside the mine. I followed it and then I realized where I was. There was this rusted gate that had a sign, closed, do not enter, and stuff like that. About 10 feet or so past the gate was this really big pile of rocks that sealed off the rest of the shaft. I'd assumed that this was one of the many mines that had caved in. It was mid-afternoon, so when I started to get a chill, I noticed it almost right away. The underground wind shifted direction, and instead of blowing towards me, it started to pull me closer to the gate. Inside, I could suddenly see 4 or 5 men dressed in these dirty white shirts and jeans with suspenders. They all had a pick on their shoulder, and they stopped walking as they seemed to notice me watching them. They had no eyes, just these black empty holes, and I couldn't move. I was suddenly overcome with this feeling of absolute despair and fear. Simultaneously, the men stretched out their free hands and pointed their fingers at me, almost as if they were accusing me of something. Next thing I knew, my mom had a hold of me and was shaking me and yelling, "Mary, Mary, what's wrong? What happened?" I realized that I was out of the covered entrance to the mine and I wasn't feeling quite so despairing. I answered my mom with, "I'm fine," or something to that effect. Apparently, while I was watching the men, my parents and brother had started to hike back down to the car. My mom noticed that I wasn't with them and went back to find me. Once she got back to the mine entrance, she heard me making these horrible noises. She told me that she ran and grabbed me, saying that I was deathly white and staring at something that wasn't there and saying over and over, "I didn't do it. I didn't do it." She pulled me away from the mine and then I was fine. I didn't even remember anything past seeing the men pointing at me, and I told her what I saw, but she didn't see the men and thought that I just had an episode or something. I forgot about it and didn't really think much of it. This happened in the middle of the day around 2 in the afternoon, and we were nowhere near the river or our house. The more I thought about it, what I'd seen, the more I realized that those men must have died when the mine caved in. Why they accused me of it, I don't know, but I haven't gone there since. At least, not that far up the trail. The lower half is used as an outside run for gym class, and whenever I go on that trail, the spot behind my right ear starts to hurt, and it gets worse and worse until I almost can't stand it. And I have no idea why. The shadow people. There are shadow people in my room, and they're really starting to mess with me, and I mean really mess with me. Every time I go to walk out of my room, I feel someone pull my hair hard enough to yank my head back, and I hear distinct growlings. I turn around and nothing is there. At night, whether my light is on or off, the cat is with me or not, they appear. Of course, they only appear where there's shadow, and there is one corner of my room that is always in shadow. Light or no light, I can never really see back there. I put my TV there, so most of it is covered up. Unfortunately, that hasn't done me much good. I still hear what sounds like shuffling footsteps, harsh whispers, knocking on my window, and my mom says that it's just my imagination. But if you have a box TV, go up to it and smack the top or side of it. How can you imagine that sound? It wakes me in the middle of the night, and it keeps going and going, tapping, knocking, rapping. Sometimes I think I'm going insane. A few nights ago, I went to go lay down in my room. It was close to midnight. I went to my room, shut the door, and just fell into bed. I lay there for a while, and then I felt something sharp rake across the back of my legs, while I screamed and bolted upright. I looked around, thinking that it could have been my cat. He wasn't in the room, and my door was shut tight. I went to see where he was, and found him sleeping in the living room, right where I'd left him. I checked the back of my legs and found 3 distinct bleeding scratches that ran across both calves. Needless to say, I didn't go back into my room. I slept out in the living room with my brother and his friends, who did hear me scream. Last night, I sat up when all the noise started up again. I stared right at the darkest corner of my room, and though I do not practice religion, said, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ." And I said it out loud, very clear and very firmly. Instead of feeling better, the atmosphere in the room got really heavy, and I felt like bolting out of there instantly. When the feeling didn't subside, I told whatever was in my room to please leave me alone and to stop tormenting me. I heard what sounded like evil laughter, like someone giggling at my discomfort and my feeble attempt to make it leave. I tried everything I could think of, and they keep coming back. I tried time and time again to find out if anything strange had happened in my home before we moved here, but have found nothing. There's nothing that could be causing this unless they're drawn to me. None of this happened until one of my friends dared me to enter our local cemetery alone. I told them to forget about it and just leave me alone. And they said, sure, fine, whatever. And when I turned away from them, they pushed me over the wall, and the next thing I knew, I was back on the outside of the gate, and my friends were freaking out. I asked them what happened, and they told me that the instant I was over the wall, I started screaming bloody murder, then just collapsed. I'm thinking about these shadow people having something to do with that incident, but I'm not sure. I'm scared and angry and wish that they would just go away. I don't know what to do, and my mom won't believe anything I say. I showed her the scratches, and she says it was a cat and refused to hear anything more. But I know the truth, and I know it's not my cat. The Crying Lady. I don't know if we just moved into the wrong house or if some people are just more receptive to unearthly phenomena. My mom and I lived in this cute little house. Nothing happened at first until a couple of months later. We were sitting in the kitchen having tea with my aunt and my cousin when all of a sudden we hear this lady crying in the basement. We all looked at each other and we knew nobody was downstairs because we were all upstairs. We knew it wasn't a radio or TV because there wasn't any downstairs. My mom suggested we peek down the stairs, but as we came closer, the crying got louder. So we decided to just listen upstairs. It continued for a few minutes, then just stopped. I only heard this one time. I don't know if my mom ever heard it again, though. Another time I was sitting in a chair watching TV in the same house when I felt like someone was watching me. You know that feeling of chills down your back? That's what happened. I turned to look behind me, and I could see this red kind of see-through hand coming at me like it was going to grab me. It was late at night, and I was up by myself. I immediately jumped off, turned off the TV, and hopped into bed with my mom. Here's another story. This happened in another house, and it was about 3 years ago. This was an old 2-story house that belonged to this old couple that both had died. I don't know if they died in this house. Me and my friend were painting a piece of furniture downstairs. Just her and I were there when all of a sudden, the washer door just slams down twice. We both looked at each other and walked up the stairs slowly. She then told me that she was just sitting on the washer a few minutes ago and that the washer door was closed. There's only one bedroom on the main floor in this house, and it happened to be my room. Sometimes we could see little orbs of light in there. That bedroom was right beside the living room, and one night while I was watching TV by myself, I could hear someone breathing hard, sort of snoring. I turned down the TV and listened. Sure enough, it sounded like someone was sleeping in the room when there was nobody in there. We used to hear someone walking around upstairs as well. I'm not the only one that's heard these things. My husband and children used to hear these things too. Even my teenage daughter never wanted to be alone in that house. To this day, they still mention the old haunted house. The house is now empty, but the guy who lives beside it says he hears things like slamming doors coming from the house occasionally. I don't believe that these spirits were out to harm anybody. Maybe it was just the old couple that used to live there. However, just before we lived in this old house, we used to live in a trailer where we experienced a few freaky things. A few people, including me, used to see shadows in the shape of a person walking around in the trailer. This one night, everybody was in bed except me and my husband. We decided to go to bed, so we turned off all the lights and went to bed. About 10 minutes go by and we were just falling asleep, and the lamp in the living room turns on. We knew it wasn't any of us because the kids were sleeping and we were both in bed. Maybe it was the land we were living on, or because my husband's brother used to have a trailer about 2 meters from where our trailer was. The freaky thing is both of our trailers burnt down. His burnt quite a few years before ours, We told his brother what we experienced, and he said they used to hear and see things as well. So I do wonder what used to be on that piece of land that is just so unhappy and decided to haunt anybody who tries to live there. The house of many hauntings. There is a house in my hometown where I used to live at. One of my friends used to live there as well. We have seen both the same stuff at the same time, but some things we saw at different times. When I lived there, I saw some things, and when he lived there, he saw some other things. Now, the first thing I saw happen one morning when I was getting ready for school. I was headed downstairs with my sheet because it was always cold, and I felt like something was behind me, so I turned to look, and it was a dog. Only I could see through it, and it had no head. The second thing that happened to me was I went down to the basement one night because this is where we had our pool table at the time. I turned on the light for the basement, and as I was walking down, I felt something grab my leg from behind the stairs. I freaked and ran down the stairs, and the light went out. I made it out the side door. After that, we put the pool table upstairs. When my family moved out, my best friend moved in like 5 or 6 years later. I had totally forgotten about the things that had happened to me in that house until he started telling me about things that had happened to him. He said on certain nights, he could hear and see a red ball bouncing down the stairs and back up the stairs. He also saw a little girl. He said the girl would appear in his room and she would be crying. He guessed because her doll's head had fallen off. But then he said a man would come wielding an axe and grab the girl and pull her out of the room. Then he threw her down the stairs. He said one night he got enough courage to follow them, and they made their way to the basement. There the ghost disappeared. He said he saw the basement change before his eyes. The floor had become covered with bones, and he saw a light shining in the corner. The basement had a little tunnel, and that it wrapped around half of the house. He crawled down the tunnel, and there was an axe up against the wall. He went to grab it, and it was gone. The next thing that happened to us was when I spent the night there. It was summer, so I was basically always over there. We were watching a wrestling show, and suddenly it got real dark outside, like freaky dark for 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and lightning started up. My buddy said this is what happened the last time before the ghost appeared. He said that lightning had flashed 13 times and then they appeared. I laughed thinking, yeah, right. Boom, the second flash of lightning. I looked out the window and saw a trailer cross the street, and it looked like someone was staring back at me. But that couldn't be because the trailer was abandoned. Then I woke up with a wet towel on my head and toilet paper on my nose. My buddy had said that I started shaking and my nose started to bleed and that I passed out. I sat up and asked how many strikes of lightning we were up to. He said 10 and asked what I saw. I tried to explain to him that it was like a man figure, but he had red glowing eyes. Bam, then another strike of lightning followed by another. There was one left, and we would see if my friend's story would hold true. Then the last strike hit. To my surprise, there was no thunder. Then the TV went off, and a cold chill filled the room. I looked around as my eyes were trying to adjust, and I saw a figure of a little girl. I quickly closed my eyes and covered my head. Then I felt something tug the covers, and I said, "Stop it, Rick. I believe you." He didn't say anything. I pulled him down, and the girl was right in front of my face. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. We did some research through locals, and they said that the house was haunted. And we were like, no shit. But one lady who used to live there added that one night she had locked up and went upstairs to lay down for bed. She had gotten almost asleep when she heard the front door unlock and open, then shut and lock back again. She rushed downstairs to find nobody in the house, so she went back to bed. Then she heard her dishes being messed with. She rushed downstairs now and found the dishes on the floor and her knives and forks floating in the air. They stopped and went flying towards her. She got behind the door and she left that night and moved out the next day. Something really bad and crazy happened in that house, but every time I try and research it, nothing pops up on the web or in any of our local papers from the past. I'm thinking somebody covered it up to sell that house. The Ghost of the Jesuit Monk. This happened in 1985 in a place in Puerto Rico called Casa Alcaldía. My friend and I were attending an art exhibit, and I saw a monk. He had a long brown habit, a long rope tied around his waist, and a long cross made of wood. It seemed like wood. The top of his head was shaved. I looked at him from behind only. I asked my friend if she saw the monk. She said she didn't see anyone. I told her to follow me so that she could see him. She couldn't see him. I tried to see his face, but I couldn't. I tried, but he continued to walk. I only got to see his ears, but not the side of his face. The monk was looking at the paintings, then he started to walk. I told my friend to follow me. I was following him because I had never seen this type of monk dressed in that manner. Then he turned to the left, where there were some stairs to go to the second floor. I thought that the second floor must be open to the public, so I followed him. When I turned to go upstairs, the gate was closed. No one was up there. It was dark. My friend asked me what was wrong with me. I said, forget it. I thought I saw a monk, but well, I did see it. 2 years later, I happened to be working at the tourist department that was located outside the same building on the first floor. One day, my supervisor told me to do a research on some interesting points in town. I asked him about the building's history. He told me that it used to be a Jesuit church and that nearby was a cemetery. I asked him if he ever heard of any strange stories about the place. He said he had, and that he had even experienced something. He said he was alone there one night looking for something having to do with the carnival that they were about to have. All of a sudden he saw a tall man with a black cape and hood on it, and that the figure reached out his hand and touched him, and that it was very cold. Why he did this, he doesn't know. And then the figure vanished. One day, a worker and I went to the second floor above the office. I opened the lock, and I put the lock in a secured place. Then we were looking for some costumes. When we were done, the lock was not there. We were frightened. After a long time, we finally found the lock on a seat of a chair, where I knew I had not left it. After that, we left right away. I even had stomach pains because I was so frightened. I never went up there again. Later on, I learned that there were a lot of stories about this place, where people had seen apparitions of not only monks, but slaves and other people. All I know is, I never went up to that second floor again.